So I don't know about anybody else who had some trouble getting through that last song. It's in a minor key. It's you get to where it's like, okay, I'm following the rhythm, and then it change. And I think it fits today really well. And maybe it's just because I don't know about anybody else this week. Working in a construction site is always a little bit interesting, and so there was lots of dust this week. We were moving things, trying to make things work, and everything just felt a little out of sorts at times. So maybe that's part of it. But I think there's also something very, very apropos to, on Palm Sunday, there is this real dissonance between what people expected and what's going on, and it's a dissonance. It's a friction that I think we still see play out today within the Christian church. Of who is Jesus? What does Jesus mean, and how does that work out in our lives? I still think one of the great temptations is to try to make God act like we would want God to act. Try to cast God in our own image. There's a reason that that the Jewish people always had this real struggle with, having any kind of image of God, and there's a reason why we as a church have always struggled with, well, yes, we have Jesus, but exactly how much does that really define what our lives are like and what God is like? Because I think there is some resistance in there. There's some struggle in the midst of this because, and one of the things that's been kind of becoming more and more clear to me, I've going into this Holy Week, but also looking a little bit ahead into teaching on Revelation after Easter is over, is just that realization of the way in which, one of the reasons I think Revelation gets so misunderstood is that people try to put on God the things that Revelation is making a mockery of, instead of saying, hey, this is what Revelation is trying to say. This is what God is not like. They said, hey, this is what God is like. So, and this applies into Palm Sunday as well. So you have to understand, in the time of Revelation, that Revelation was written, the time that the Gospels were lived, but also in the time when they were written, there was one great nation, or one great superpower in the world, and it was Rome. And Rome liked to flaunt his power. Rome loved to now, they didn't like to have their legions come and march through the streets, but they did. Whenever there would be a major victory, they would not only have a parade to memorialize it, they would memorialize it in stone. And so we still have many of these arches that are all throughout the Roman Empire. For example, this one, which commemorates the fall of Israel, or the fall of Jerusalem, and you can see them carrying the menorah that they've taken out of the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD and parading it through the streets along with the slaves they've taken from Jerusalem and representations of the military units as they go past. It was one of these things to where, Rome would come and say, this is what it means to be great. This is what it means to be powerful. This is one of the reasons that Caesar was worshipped as a god. One of the gods among the many that the Romans worshipped, but worshipped as God throughout the empire, was because here was where power resided. Here, come and look at how great we are in how we can conquer everybody else. And, one of the key words in the book of Revelation is the word Nikeo. You know what word we use that's really common with that right now? Nike. It means to conquer. It's Greek for conquer. So when they say just do it, that's what they're referencing back to. Anyways, so that was what a lot of people thought of when you said, hey, this is what a king should be like. This is what power should be like. This is what, when Israel gets lifted up and they're the ones in charge, this is what we're going to be like, right? No. From the very beginning of Israel's identity, that they've always been called to be something different. And they were called out of Egypt, which was at that point the world power of its day. And they were called on this journey into the wilderness, and they were called into the promised land. They were supposed to be a society that was not supposed to be like that. And so what do? How can we be like Egypt? How can we be like Babylon? How can we be like Rome? How can we be like all these other things? And, there is, in the beginning of the book of Revelation, where you've had the initial kind of vision, you've had the letters to the churches, and then you have this scene where the heavenly group is assembled, and they're getting ready to welcome the Lion of Judah. And again, I think a lot of people think, oh yeah, this is what a king's supposed to be like. And what do they find there? The crucified lamb. The lion's a lamb, and it conquers not by force. It conquers by love. It conquers by being willing to put itself up as the one who absorbs the anger and the hatred of the world. And so it turns everything on its head. And the book of Revelation is a book that really takes everything and turns it on its head and says, hey, this is what you think is really powerful. This is what you think is really the way things are supposed to be. And here's what God says. Here's what Rome does. And this is not what God does. And I think that's, as we come into Palm Sunday today, I'm going to take us a little bit further back in the story. So I'm going to go back right about to the middle of the story where there is a scene where Jesus asks his disciples, well, who do you say that I am? Or who do the people say that I am? And they say, well, some people say you're like John the Baptist. Some people say you're like one of the prophets. And then who do you say that I am? And Peter says, well, you're the Messiah. You're the Son of the living God. And then immediately after this, Jesus starts talking about this path that he's going to walk. And Peter takes him aside and says, oh, no, Lord, this is not the way it's going to be. This is not the way it's going to be. This is not the way. I just said you're the Messiah. I just said you're the king. That kings don't act like this. And Jesus says to him, get behind me, Satan. You're putting your mind on human things, not on divine things. We often forget that piece of that. You're putting your mind on human things and not on divine things. Right before we enter into the scene of Jesus coming in and processing into Jerusalem, there's two stories. And again, this is one of the things when we go over the lectionary, it takes us out of order, so we miss these two stories in where they actually fall. So you have James and John. They come up to Jesus and says, well, Jesus, we want you to grant us whatever we ask. Okay, Jesus is now the genie, Okay, here's your wish. Here's your wish. Well, on the one hand, being a little bit facetious about it, but on the other hand, James and John see in Jesus, again, they're starting to see some of the things that Peter saw at that point, and so they ask for basically the same thing. When you come into your kingdom, when you come into power, we want one to be on your right hand and one to be on your left hand. If you're going to be in charge, we want to be there right there with you. We want the positions of power. We want the positions of influence. We want the positions of authority. We want to surround ourselves. We want to be those who can surround ourselves and wrap ourselves in the cloak of your power. And it is one of these things to where you almost see Jesus take a step back in the scene. Doesn't actually say it, but you can almost kind of, in seeing the way it's written, it's almost like he takes a step back and just almost shaking his head. Do you have any idea what you're asking? And he asked them, can you drink the cup which I'm about to drink? Can you be baptized in the baptism which I'm about to be baptized with? And of course, James and John, the sons of thunder, say, yes, we can. The ones who have been following him, the ones who have been closest to him, are blind. They can't see. Even Jesus' followers can't see what all this is going to mean or how this is going to play out or what it's going to mean. They don't understand that the coming of the kingdom of God is going to mean the one on the right hand and the one on the left hand is going to be bandit 1 and bandit 2. But Jesus is there on the cross. But they can't see that. And in their shoes, we wouldn't either. Because I think we would just be just as blind. And so Mark loves to tell stories in a way that kind of capture that for us. So right before we get into this scene at Bethany and Bethphage where Jesus is sending his disciples, they are coming up from Jericho, and as they pass through Jericho, there is Bartimaeus, who is blind. And Bartimaeus calls out to Jesus, "Jesus, Son of David, save me." And everybody keeps trying to shut him up, saying, "Shh, be quiet, you're causing a ruckus here. Don't bother Jesus, he's too important for you." And Jesus stops. He calls up blind Bartimaeus, who in his blindness understands who Jesus is, while everybody else seems to be completely oblivious to it. He says, "What can I do for you?" And asks for his sight. And so Bartimaeus sees, even though everybody else around, I think, is still blind. And so as Jesus enters into Jerusalem, and he enters in a way that a king, on the one hand, there is all these royal imagery. Jesus is coming in the same way that King David comes in. So slide back. He comes in the same way that King David would come in. But he doesn't come in on a white horse or anything else like that. He doesn't come in with an army behind him or a parade or anything else like that. He comes in riding a colt. Again, it references back to Zechariah. And it's this image of, the prophet saying to the people, but this is what the king is supposed to be like. He's not supposed to be the one who grasps all power to himself or who everybody follows because he's the military leader. It's the person who says, God is the one who's in charge, and I'm going to ride in, and I'm going to be humble. And so here comes Jesus riding in on the colt, an unridden colt. If you've ever ridden on a horse, you want one that's been ridden, one that's been broken in. You don't want the young horse that hasn't been broken in yet. And yet here's exactly what Jesus is riding in on. There's probably a reason why people say, why in the world are you taking the colt? Take the big horse. Anyways, so Jesus comes in that way, and yes, people start laying their cloaks on the ground. They start going, they cutting branches off the trees and laying them on the ground, but it is in a very real way. It's so much different than the way other kings would enter. It's not the best and the brightest who are following him or who are lifting him up. It's those, in many cases, those who he's touched. People like blind Bartimaeus who he's healed, or the women who are following him, or those who he's cast out demons from, or those who he's fed, or those who just happen to be there at that moment saying, who in the world is this? And what in the world is going on? And could this really be one who would be something different to us? And I'm going to tell you that not everybody who's there at that moment understands who Jesus is or what he means or anything else like that. One of the readings for Palm Sunday is one of my favorite readings in all the Bible. It comes from Paul's letter to the Philippians. It's the 2nd chapter, verses 5 through 11. And really, Paul writes some incredible stuff, but I think this is one of the most central pieces. Perhaps it was one of these things that I know that the early church, after the letter of Philippians, uses an early creed, but it was a confession of faith of who is this Jesus, and it's really kind of the pivot of the book of Philippians, to where Paul says, "Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be exploited, but emptied himself. And taking the form of a slave and being found in human likeness, he was obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross." And so, again, in that whole thing of putting your mind on divine things and not on human things, again, I think it's so easy to want to say, the way that we would do it, to where we throw the massive parade and we would show off our power and our wealth and our privilege and everything else, that we would want to say that's the way God would do it, and God just does just the opposite. God may have all of those things. God may have all the power and the wealth and the fame and everything else, but the character of God is to be one who serves, not one who is served. That Jesus turns that upside down and empties himself of that and comes to us as one who is humble, as one who conquers by loving, by serving, by offering, not by conquering and ruling. Not in Mark, but in Matthew and Luke, in the temptation narratives, that's the thing. Hey, if you just say the word, I'll give you all this power, and you can rule over these nations. You can rule over everything. That would be to set your mind on human things. One of the things this day I think calls us back to, and this week calls us back to, as we prepare for the resurrection, as we prepare for Easter, as we prepare for all these things, the reason we go through this week and the reason we spend the time on Maundy, Thursday, and Good Friday is to remind us that God's ways are not our ways. That God doesn't come and overthrow the world or send in the angelic armies to Israel and Rome and everywhere else. God comes in Jesus riding on a colt into Jerusalem because this is the God who loves us, who loves the city, who loves God's people, who loves people as individuals, who wants to have that love returned, but knows that that love is often going to be met with hatred, rejection. And he comes anyway. That God conquers not as the Lion of Judah, but as the Lamb of God. That there will be times where we, as God's people, will be blind, and where perhaps sometimes those other ones on the side of the road who have been looked upon as blind, they may see. They may be the Bartimaeus, and we may be the James and John at times. But I do think that Palm Sunday is an invitation to consider what is it that is the mind of Christ that we are to follow, that we are to emulate, that we're to be called into. What is this way of Christ that calls us to take up our cross and be willing to follow Him? What is this way of love which calls us to love another, to love even our enemies? Not the easy road. It's perhaps in a minor key. Perhaps like the song that we entered in with. The rhythm changes on us and we find ourselves, wait a minute, I'm still singing this note over here. And we're supposed to be up here. And yet it is the way of discipleship. It is the way of following. It is the way that Jesus calls us into. Come, follow me. And so as we enter into this week, as we move towards the cross, as we move towards Good Friday, we walk with Jesus on this path which leads to Jerusalem, to Golgotha, to the empty tomb. Welcome to the end of our Lenten journey. Welcome to the beginning of our Holy Week journey. May we walk together. And may we follow the Lord who leads us. May we put our mind on divine things, not on human things. Amen.